Stick around because today we're going to talk about PTSD and how your characters might respond to it. What's up, guys? My name is McNulty. I'm a writer, I'm the author of Bad Parts, and welcome to my writing channel. Today we're going to talk about PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And I just want to say up front, I am by no means an expert on this. I am just a guy on the internet. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just trying to help people who do want to write about characters with PTSD, just give you some ideas to build off of. This should not be your one-stop shop for PTSD advice. I mean, definitely learn as much as you can about the subject, and read memoirs on it if you can, and maybe even ask people on online forums if that helps as well. But as for PTSD, what it is a mental state that can develop after someone experiences trauma. And trauma can happen in a lot of different forms. You can have acute trauma, which would be like a single event, like a car accident that causes trauma. You could have complex trauma, which would be multiple events causing trauma. You could have chronic events causing trauma, like abuse over a long period of time. There are plenty of different things that can serve as trauma. Now, PTSD, of course, will develop from that trauma. And when we're writing about PTSD, one important thing to keep in mind is the symptoms. Typically with PTSD, you'll have symptoms like disturbing thoughts, disturbing feelings, disturbing dreams. But I think the most important thing to remember for writers is this thing called hypervigilance. And what hypervigilance is, in the most simple terms, is it's a state of heightened sensitivity where you are scanning the area for potential threats. You might be scanning for sights, for sounds, for potential people, or even behaviors that link back to the original trauma. This is a state of heightened anxiety that can leave your characters feeling exhausted. And it's definitely something to consider when you are writing, especially if you're having your characters go through their thoughts and process their environments. Maybe they're at like a party and they're noticing, different people, and maybe certain people remind them of someone who assaulted them in the past. Or maybe you have a scenario where a character is riding a bus and they notice like a certain traffic pattern that once caused them to have an accident, and these kind of things can just make them unsettled and make them uncomfortable. It's something to think about, and I think it's definitely something where you can use your creativity to draw some very interesting characters and scenarios. And then one other very important thing to remember when you are writing about PTSD is how characters respond to PTSD. And there are three common ways they do this. They all begin with the letter F, and they are fight, flight, and freeze. The first one of these is fight, and this involves things like irritability and raising your voice, and it can even involve things like being sensitive to loud noises. But typically, fight is going to involve characters who are angry, they're hostile, they're trying to protect themselves. Now, the second category is flight, and with flight, you're thinking about characters who might be trying to flee the scene, to get to safety, to just get away from the dangerous environment. And they might do this by physically leaving the area, or they might try to withdraw into drugs and alcohol. Some common drugs you might even think about are things like Xanax and Valium. Those are often used by people who do have PTSD. And then another thing to keep in mind with characters who are in that flight response, they might feel like the people around them are closing in on them. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the third type of response is freeze. And freeze can involve things like being in a state of depression, or feeling like life is pointless, or even feeling as though you're paralyzed and being unable to move. So all these different types of responses are definitely things you want to keep in mind when you are writing your stories, and it's important to remember that not every person will respond in the same way. So try to vary it up and find the most appropriate response for your characters. Just a couple more things I want to throw out there before I wrap up this video. Characters with PTSD will typically not just get over it. This is something that they're going to struggle with for a long time. It's going to shape their lives, unfortunately. So keep this in mind. They don't simply just get over it, or they don't just, fall in love with someone and then everything's perfectly fine. A lot of people complain about that when they see it in books, where people overcome trauma by just finding the right person. No, it doesn't work like that. If you are having characters who are coping with PTSD, they'll have different methods of doing it. It's going to vary from person to person. Typically, what does help a lot of people are things like group therapy or seeing professionals or things like that. So keep those in mind if you do have your characters, trying to overcome it and, taking the proper steps to doing it. One last thing I want to throw out there is from a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And this is a book on PTSD that I read last year, and there was one particular takeaway that I found really interesting, and it was the idea that people with PTSD often struggle to live in the present, and they're caught in the past, or they're worried about the future. They're struggle to live in the present until there is like a life and death scenario, and once that life and death scenario kicks into place, all of a sudden they're right on target. Everything, kind of locks into place with them, and they are in the zone. And this is something to keep in mind, especially if you're going to write a character who is in a more action-oriented story, something like that. You might have a scenario where a character is, just wallowing through their miserable emotions for different periods of time, and then when there's this life and death scenario where maybe they have to protect themselves or protect other people, all of a sudden everything clicks for them. So that's just one thing I'm going to throw out there. I mean, it's not going to be the same for every single character you write, but if you are writing a type of story where there is action and there is life and death circumstances, you might want to keep that in mind. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: does your current work in progress contain a character who has PTSD? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of Bad Parts if you haven't already. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, hit the like and subscribe buttons for me, share this video with a friend, and as always, remember to keep on writing.